I don't know how in the world I'm going to get through what I'm going to get through in 25 minutes, but I felt like the Lord put on my heart to talk about a new life resolution, not a New Year's resolution, a new life resolution. There are many times in the year that are natural for us to almost like I call a reboot. Now, anybody who had computers in the 80s understood what Control-Alt-Delete was. They don't do that anymore. But so when I say reboot, it's like, old language. It's like, it's like those of us that really still own a Commodore 64. I really do own a Commodore 64, merely for nostalgic sake. But Easter is a great time, summer, birthdays, anniversaries, and of course the new year. I want to talk about someone in the Old Testament that had a moment in their life, and their whole life led up to that moment, and it was a new life resolution, a new moment, and his name was Jacob. We have Father Abraham, the father of our faith, as what Paul says in Romans. You have Isaac, his son, and then you have Jacob. I love the story of Jacob, because Jacob, in my view, is one of the, if you'd want to say, evidences or arguments for the authenticity of the Bible. Why would I say that? The whole nation is named after this guy. He was a pivotal point in history that in essence, the Messiah would come through his lineage. And yet God chose a sinner, a flawed individual, a flawed family full of dysfunction. And he took a guy like that and said, I'm going to name a people after you. It's a great story of starting over. Jacob is a story of who we are as people. We're a mess. And yet God says, I love you and we're going to use you. I got great things for you. Isaac, in Genesis, Isaac, the father of Jacob, and takes his wife, Rebekah, and settles in Beersheba. Put that up there, Beersheba. This is actual picture of the ruins of Beersheba. And by the way, we will visit there in November. It is a profound place. This is the place of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This is where David dwelled. You get to literally touch the well that Isaac dug and is still looked down there and there's water down there. It's amazing. So this is where Jacob grew up, in this what is now a fairly barren place, but there's an actual city behind this picture, a rather large city. There is an active city of Beersheba. By the way, Beer meaning 7, Sheva meaning well. 7 wells, the land of 7 wells. Of course, it became a city or a location there. The Lord appeared to Isaac and spoke to him. He says, I am the God of your father Abraham. Do not be afraid, for I am with you. He says, I will bless you, and I will increase your numbers and your descendants. And he did, in fact, that. Rebekah, Jacob's mother, became pregnant in this place. And there were 2 young boys in her womb. The Bible says that they jostled with each other. When I read that this week, I was thinking about my wife, and I have such huge respect for mothers. And I'm not just saying that, I'm not just placating. I do. To bear a child is such a huge thing to go through. And obviously I haven't, but I've watched it and have learned to respect motherhood and the suffering that actually happens. It's a suffering and joy at the same time. But to have twins, oh my gosh. And not just to have twins, but to have twins that are arguing with each other in the womb. Poor Rebecca. Matter of fact, it actually says, what is happening to me. That's what she says. She's like, get these two beings out of me. I don't know what it's like to give birth, but I'm sure glad I'm a man, let me tell you. And I say that with respect. Truth is God spoke directly to Rebekah when she was just, I can't take this tension in my belly. There was tension in the womb. And God spoke to her and said, there will be 2 nations that will come from these boys. But the older will serve the younger. In other words, God had spoke to her prophetically what was going to happen in their life, and not in their life, but with their nations. You had Jacob and Esau. These were not identical twins. You know? They were probably fraternal twins. They were different, but from the same womb. One guy was hairy. The other guy wasn't. Okay? Esau was hairy. Jacob wasn't. Esau became a skillful hunter, and he was the outdoor guy. He was a man's man. Okay? Jacob wasn't. He was quiet and hung around the tents. And I say this with truth, but some of you will be offended, but he was a mama's boy. He was kind of weak. And guys like that tend to be a little bit more of a schemer. They can't get it by force, so they'll kind of go around the bend and do this to try to get their way. Esau, as they grew up, you can just imagine the tension, but also as we see, even to the point where, Jacob tricked Esau out of his birthright for a cup of soup. As they emerged into their 40s, now they're grown men. Okay, they're not like 20-year-olds or 30-year-olds, they're 40. They're in their 40s. Okay, Esau decided to get married. And he married 2 Canaanite women or Hittite women. And the Bible is very clear. It says that these 2 women were a source of grief for Isaac and Rebekah. A source of grief. And you enter into a season of Jacob's life of family conflict. You ever had family conflict? Nobody's ever had family conflict. That's never happened to you in your life. Okay, well, you had one amazing family. The rest of us know what I'm talking about. And at that time, Isaac was old. And he was blind. And he knew his time was coming to an end, and he called Esau in and said, I'm an old man. I don't know when I'm going to die, but I know it's soon. Go out and hunt for me. Get me some good game. Cook it for me that I may enjoy it. And this is saying his last meal, he's kind of thinking. And he goes on and says, then I'll bless you. And when he said, I'll bless you, that's a significant moment. Well, Rebekah heard what was going on. And Rebekah, I'm sure, was thinking back when God spoke to her. That blessing actually belongs to Jacob. So I'm going to set things up for Jacob. And she calls Jacob over, and Jacob isn't a young man anymore. He's a middle-aged guy. Okay? And she says, bring me 2 goats, and I'll prepare them in a way that your father will like. Just the way he likes it. And then you're going to take this to him, and you're going to give it to him, and he's going to bless you before he dies. And Jacob's like, but Mom, my brother Esau is a hairy guy. I am not. It would appear to my father that I'm tricking him. And she just says, Jacob, just do what I tell you. Let's go do it. So he does. She prepares the food. She goes and finds Esau's best clothes so it smells like him, which probably is kind of stinky because he's an outdoors guy, Okay? And she puts those clothes on Jacob, and then she covers his hands and his neck with goat skin. So he probably looked more like Chewbacca. And so Jacob went in. And his father was there, couldn't see him, and Isaac was going to bless. Isaac's blessing, this moment, was to come about. And Jacob came in and identified himself as his brother Esau. But, Isaac was old, but he's not dumb. And by then, if you lose a sense, your eyes, a scene, or your other senses get more in tune, right? Well, I'm sure his hearing was well enough to recognize, because it makes it very clear that you don't sound like Esau, you sound like Jacob. You got to wonder if Isaac kind of went along with this. Because I'm not totally convinced that he was just, blind and dumb. And that somehow he knew this was coming. I'm sure him and Rebekah had conversations, and Rebekah say, hey, this is what God said to me when they were in the womb. I'm sure this was not any accident. By the way, Esau was Isaac's favorite. He was kind of a man's man, so he kind of leaned that way. Where Jacob was more, Rebekah's favorite. So you can see the tension and probably this turmoil even in Isaac, knowing that God probably is going to bless Jacob, knowing in his heart the character of his sons, that Jacob probably will carry the mantle better than Esau. And he had him come close to him, and he touched his hands in his neck, and he says, are you really Esau? I am, replied Jacob. So he deceived Isaac, and Isaac blesses him. He blesses Jacob by saying this. It's recorded in Genesis when he says, may God give you heaven's dew and earth's riches, an abundance of grain and new wine. Many nations, may nations serve you, and peoples bow down to you. May those who curse you be cursed, and those who bless you be blessed. That's a powerful blessing. Powerful blessing. Words coming out of a father's mouth. Isaac finishes blessing him, and Esau comes in from hunting, finding out what had just happened, that Jacob had deceived Isaac and received the blessing, and Esau had lost the blessing, the verbal blessing. And it says Esau wept out loud. He grieved and he begged his father to reverse it. But Isaac stood by his words. And that's because there's a powerful truth that happens in this moment. One that has been lost through the ages. One that has been lost because we are Gentiles. The power of the spoken blessing of the Father. When a father blesses his children verbally, solemnly, with faith, God's power, his blessings will follow it. I don't want to control my kids. I don't want to control them. They're growing up. I was telling someone the other day, they're growing up and they're leaving home and the rules change and I don't know what the rules are. I do know one thing. I don't want to control their life. I want to bless their life. And so I say, don't do things that I can't bless. I want to bless. Fathers, I speak to you. You have the solemn power of heaven when in faith you bless your children. Grandfathers, you can bless your grandchildren. I'm not diminishing the role of the woman at all here. I am saying that in the context of this passage, the father mattered. Maybe you've long since kids are raised and you're wondering, how can this work now? You can still bless. He's old. They're middle-aged. They were blessing in the 40s. He was probably in his 80s. They were in the 40s. You can bless your children even as adults. I would argue that they want your blessing. Inside they crave it. And they should want it. But you should never use it to control. It should be meant to encourage righteousness and holiness and following God. This solemnly declared with the mouth in the ancient world, hear this, was irrevocable. It would not be revoked. A blessing, a promise, a curse, if it was spoken, it was done. And that's when Jesus stood on the cross when he said with his words, "It is finished." It's irrevocable what happened on the cross. Let that sink in. Well, Esau, when he realized he had lost his blessing, he held a grudge against Jacob. And he said to himself, I'm going to kill him. I'm sure he said to himself, he thought about it, but I'm sure he also blabbed about it. He wasn't the guy that had the most disciplined life. And Rebekah heard about it and warned Jacob that your brother's going to kill you. You better flee. So all of a sudden he's seeking the blessing, but then all of a sudden he's got to leave with nothing. Okay? And he flees. But just before he flees, to avoid his brother's fury, because he was fearful of it, it was real, he trembled, it says. And as he prepared to leave, Isaac called him and once again blessed him. But before he blessed him, he warned him, do not marry a Canaanite woman, but marry from your uncle's family, Laban. Someone we know that have right values. He warned him against marrying a Canaanite. You know, since Abraham and through the Jewish nation and even the early church, they created barriers to ensure that unholiness would not seep into their lives and their families' lives. Now, as I talk this way, some of you get uncomfortable because we don't like rules. Typically, human beings do not like rules. Gentiles do not like rules. We are Gentiles. We are not Jewish. Maybe you do have Jewish blood in your life. God bless you for it. But I don't. Okay? We typically don't like rules. So I'm going to make sure no one tells me what those rules are. And if you do, then you're a legalist and I want you part of my life. That's the attitude we get. Okay? But the truth is, Jesus said, if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. He was using it as a metaphor, not literally cut your hand off. He's saying if this is causing a problem, axe it out. Get rid of it. Don't marry those Canaanite women. I'm going to speak openly here. I am Mike Van Proyen. I am a man. And I need to have a filter on the internet. Because I don't want any of that stuff coming towards me because I know myself. And I'm honest about it. I'm not a super duper Christian. Some of us want to be delivered from this and that. Cut it off. Our spirituality is less about this moment to stop it. Just stop it. That is what Jesus was saying. Cut it off. Don't marry the Canaanite women. I don't know how I'm going to get through this. Gentiles didn't do this. But the faith of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, we don't have the 660-some rules that the Talmud gives us from the Jewish people in the Old Testament, intertestamental time. Jesus freed us from that. But he then just said, okay, we're not going to govern you, but now I'm putting the responsibility on you to govern yourself. Govern yourself. Govern your family. Create barriers. And Isaac blesses him again and says, may God Almighty bless you and make you fruitful and increase in numbers, and you become a community of peoples. May he give you your descendants the blessing of Abraham, that you may take possession of this land. Jacob, take possession of this land, Beersheba. Jacob left Beersheba. He was a man of the tents. He was not an outdoors guy. He's out in the boonies, up in the mountains by himself. I'm sure he's afraid, freaked out. He just left all his assets at home, and now he's on his own, going to people he doesn't know. And God gives him a dream, and he saw what appeared to be a stairway. The NIV says it rested on the earth and went to heaven. And in this dream, there were angels coming up and coming down and descending on it. And God promises the land that he was in, and all the peoples of the earth would be blessed. And he sees this vision. It is often called Jacob's ladder. Okay, and here's a artist's rendition of the ladder. And over the last millennium, countless artists have tried to describe this image of his dream. And here's another one. Here's another artist's rendition. And then here's another artist's rendition. I tend to think this is probably a little bit more accurate. The interesting thing is they say Jacob's ladder because the King James says ladder, but it probably wasn't a ladder. It's this Hebrew word that's used here is only used here in the Bible. It's only used once, but in other extra biblical ancient writings, that Hebrew word is used to describe a ramp, or if you'd want to say, kind of a series of steps constructed in order a person may reach the location. God speaks to us in images that we understand about a world and realm that we can't understand. And in the time of Jacob, he would have understood what a ziggurat was. Here's the great ziggurat of Ur. This literally is about 4,000 years old. It's in southern Iraq, near Babylon, near Baghdad. And this was unearthed, and it's in incredible shape, and it literally is a ramp that ascends to a place of the heavens. And so it may have looked something like that. In my view, this is, again, sometimes the simplest answer is the right answer. What was he saying to him? He was blessing him, saying this land would be yours and all the peoples of the earth would be blessed. And guess what? I'm going to show you an image of that blessing. And now there's going to be a path to heaven through your lineage. That's what's going to happen. And God says, I will watch over you and bless you, and I will bring you back to this land. So he had this dream, this great revelation. So he has this incredible revelation. It was no small thing. So what does he do? Jacob makes a conditional commitment. He goes on and says, as surely the Lord is in this place, there is no other place like this is God's house. And he made a vow. Genesis 28:20, he says he made a vow. If God will be with me and if will watch over me, I am taking and I'll give him, if he gives me food and clothes and everything I need, he goes on and says, then I will, I'll give him a tenth of what I owe. In other words, God, I will bless you if you bless me. That is a guy on the path of maturity. At least he's praying. At least he's getting revelation. But he's not there yet because he's kind of saying, this is a transactional relationship, God. You give me and I'll give you. How many know that, and I'm not asking you to raise your hand, many of us have done that. God, if you do this for me, I'll do this for you. That's part of the journey of faith, of coming out of our wickedness and selfishness. It happens. And the truth is that this is the guy that a nation would be named after. This is the guy that the promise of heaven for all of humanity would come through his lineage. This is the guy that this all rests on at this moment in history. And this guy is interested in self-preservation. At this stage in his life, he wasn't a noble figure. But God saw the end of his journey. He saw what was going to come. At the end of his journey, trek from Beersheba to the north, he finally gets to this well and he sees Rachel. And he asks her where her father Laban was. And Laban meets Jacob and he's overjoyed. His sister's son, Jacob, you're my own flesh and blood, he says. And Laban asked Jacob, what if you're going to stay here after you've been there a month, or if you're going to stay here, what can I do for you? And of course, Jacob immediately saw Rachel at the well, and he's like, whoa, man. The Bible says she was well informed. That's all I need to say. I mean, he was visual. Typical guy. He says, Jacob was in love with Rachel and said, I'll work for 7 years for her. He could have said 3. And I think he'd have got what he wanted. But the point is, he said 7. Probably about the 5th year, he's like, what was I thinking? But actually it didn't, because in verse 20 of 29 it says, so Jacob served 7 years to get Rachel, but it seemed only a few days because of his love for her. I mean, this is like a Hallmark movie here, This is like a Hallmark movie, But it's also the significance of Jacob choosing the younger daughter, because in the culture of the day, and Laban kind of tricks him with it, the wealth of the father followed the older daughter. There would be more wealth that would follow the older daughter. In ancient world, it wasn't about love, it was economics. And Jacob showed his quality. Maybe this is what God saw in him, that he was willing to take less for love. Maybe this is what God saw in him, who he was, the price he was willing to pay. God sees that in us. He sees the best in us. God has the long view of us. No matter how you feel about your life now or what people are saying, God has a long view of you. When those 7 years were up, it was time for his wedding time. Laban threw a big wedding feast. And the evening came, and Laban took his other daughter, Leah, and gave her to Jacob. And then it says Jacob laid with her and woke up the next day. And I'm sorry, I don't get this. How that could be, I have no idea. The only explanation I have, he was a guy, and just, the best got him. Just the truth. I think that's just a raw reality. And he went back to Laban and said, you tricked me. What have you done? I served you for Rachel. And he goes, well, it's our custom, but the older girl goes first. And in fact, he was betrayed on his wedding night. Probably somewhat truth when Paul talks about, says, the measure that you use will be measured unto you. What you sow, you will reap. And probably that's a little bit what's going on here. And this deception went full circle with him. And Laban offers Rachel immediately a week later as his second wife. But he had to work 7 more years. He could take her as wife, but he had to get 7 more years, and he agreed to that. Now, this is a strange story. In today's standards, Christian standards, okay, they're cousins, they're sisters, and there's 2 wives. And yet, how is God in all that? I don't know. I don't know. I do know this. It wasn't uncommon in the ancient East. As a matter of fact, it's not even uncommon in today's ancient East. As a matter of fact, when I was stationed in Saudi Arabia, I actually worked with a guy this actually happened to. Really. He married 2 sisters because they got swapped. Matter of fact, today in a Jewish wedding, it is the groom that puts the veil down before the wedding to check to see if it's the right girl. And it stems from this moment. The Arabs haven't figured that one out yet. But I can tell you this, no matter what our culture says about marriage and its goofiness, that it gets wrapped around an axle and wants to rechange ideas and this and that, I'm not going to go into that. I can tell you this, what Jesus said about marriage was, marriage things were allowed because of hardness of heart, but he always pointed back to Adam and Eve. That's what it's supposed to be like. That's the way God wants it to be like. That's the intent of God. When he's the one who created marriage, that's what it's supposed to be like. And we will hold to that as a church. 3,000 years later, many of the wedding traditions come from this moment. There are marriages and families that are dysfunctional. This was a dysfunctional family. Can you imagine sisters? Oh, that would be a nightmare. It was just tension. And then you got the maidservants too. It's just a mess. But out of that mess came 12 sons. And you have the 12 tribes of Israel. And after 7 years, he went back home. There was conflict, but he went back home. And this is a culmination of his life to the moment that I want to talk about. He also, by the way, tricked his father-in-law out of some herds. He was deceptive even to that point, trying to figure out what can benefit himself. And then he returns home, and he sends, as he's preparing to get into the land, he returns and prepares to meet his brother Esau, and he sends messengers ahead of him to reconcile. And the messengers come back and said, your brother is coming, but he's coming with 400 men with him. Last time they met, they wanted to kill him. So this is a big deal. He's afraid. He's full of just fear and distress. And he calls out to God, and he prepares a gift to give to his brother. And he sends his family, not ahead, but to a safer location, hopeful that his family won't be massacred. And he's alone. And he meets a mysterious adversary which would define his life. It would define the very nature of his legacy. And he had an encounter with a man, it says. Not an angel, a man. And he wrestled with him. He wrestled with him. What an odd moment. He was alone with this man. He wrestled with him till daybreak. And the man saw he could not overpower him. And he touched Jacob's socket of his hip, so it was wrenched or injured. And he limped from that day forth. Jacob saw that man as God. The man asked Jacob in verse 27 of Genesis, what is your name? He says, Jacob. And this is the moment of history right here. This is the moment. He says, your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel. And because of you have struggled with God and men and have overcome. There's a moment in your life when you've struggled with men and God and you finally surrender, but you won't leave uninjured. You will be broken because God is close to the brokenhearted, but you will overcome. I love this because the Bible does not encourage blind obedience. It always encourages to struggle with our faith before God, to ask the questions, to work out our salvation with fear and trembling. He wants it to go deep into our soul, not this surface obedience, but deep belief. It's what makes our faith so unique. And in Genesis 32:30 says, I will call this place Peniel because I saw God face to face, and yet he spared my life. When you encounter God, it's wonderful and terrifying at the same time. When we wrestle with our faith, a brokenness will emerge. Let this season be a reboot season for your life. Seek the Lord and follow him. That's your New Year's message. I went over. And we're supposed to do communion. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask the ushers to bring communion. We're going to quickly pass it out. I'm going to bless you. You take it with your family, and that'll be dismissing our service. We always do communion on New Year's Eve. So I hope you don't mind it. This went longer. But I felt very passionate about this message that God wants you to make a new life resolution. Just pass it out, gentlemen and ladies. Just pass it out. And as you receive it, may the Lord bless you with it. Receive it in faith. Make a new life resolution to follow the Lord. Your life is not perfect. You're not going to be perfect. You're going to be like Jacob and be selfish, but stay on the path. He'll finish what he started in you. And so as you're finishing it up, take it. And as you take it, you are dismissed. Be safe tonight. The Lord bless you and keep you. May his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May he lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. And Happy New Year. God bless you.